Welcome to Juan's Laboratory. Today, I'm going to continue with phase 1 of the seed starting soil experiment with the composition test. The composition test will be split into 2 separate tests, the squeeze test and the jar test. For the squeeze test, I'm going to thoroughly wet each soil and then squeeze them and see how they react when wet. When squeezed, the burpee mix has a loamy consistency, holding its shape but crumbling when gently touched, seems to absorb water easily. The back to the roots mix seems to hold its shape just slightly but crumble very easily. The jiffy mix doesn't hold its shape at all and doesn't even seem like the water penetrated through. Based on the squeeze test, I would rank them burpee, back to the roots, and jiffy. I like the burpee because it absorbs water easily. My only issue would be drainage, but it does have perlite to help with that. The back to the roots is nice too, but it does have a lot of wood chips and it seems like it would get muddy easily. The jiffy did not seem like it wanted to absorb any water, so if I were to use that in the future, I would definitely make sure I gave it enough time to absorb the water. And now for the jar test. For the jar test, I've filled the jar about 1/3 of the way with soil and the rest with the water. Now I'm gonna shake it and allow it to sit for several hours to see how the soil settles. Here I have the burpee, back to the roots, and jiffy mixes. The burpee mix looks like it has a lot of cocoa core floating at the top with perlite, with a nice thick layer of silt at the bottom. The back to the roots mix looks like it has a lot of cocoa core and perlite floating at the top, with a nice thick layer of silt on top of a nice thick layer of sand at the bottom. The jiffy mix looks like it has a nice layer of peat moss with vermiculite floating at the top, with a nice layer of silt on top of a tiny layer of sand at the bottom. Based on the jar test, I would rank them back to the roots, burpee, and jiffy. I like the back to the roots because it has a lot of different types of soils in there. My only issue is that the water in between is still murky, leading me to believe that the soil may get muddy when used. With that being said, I would consider it a tie between burpee and back to the roots for the best seed starting mix based on the composition test. I will use burpee for smaller seeds and I will use the back to the roots for bigger seeds. Stay tuned for the final test of the seed starting soil experiment. Didi, get out of my laboratory.